Well, hello there. My name is John Meyer, and this week I'm going to walk through how I get my synthesizers, guitars, and effects pedals in and out of the computer. Over the years, I've built up a collection of guitars and effects pedals and synthesizers, but I've found that if they're not wired up properly, I seldom use them. I have so many sounds in the computer, they're easy to access, and that's how I started writing music. I had guitars and a mic, and then I had synthesizers and all of that inside the computer, and that worked great. And if that's all you have, then you are in a great spot. But in the past few years, I've moved away from buying as many software instruments, I still buy too many, to buying more outboard gear. And it's expensive and it's a lot of work, but I find that it makes me happier to write music when I have stuff that I can mess with and I can adjust and tweak with the two hands that I have. But in order to get all of this set up, it took a lot of work for my brain to comprehend how I wanted to wire this up. When I look at all this, I think there's two extremes. There's one where you have nothing wired up, you grab a synthesizer, you plug it into whatever pedals, and you go into your computer, and you do that every single time. And that would not work for me ever, because I simply wouldn't do it. Too much work. The other extreme is you run everything through a patch bay. And I gave that some thought, and there are some great videos, I'll link to them, that can walk you through the process. But I found that with those setups, one, it's a lot of money in cabling, a lot of money in patch bays, and I didn't want to go to that extreme. And so I've simplified it. All of these pedals used to live on my pedal board, which I would bring out when I wanted to record and I would play live, but I found that to be cumbersome. I don't play live anymore, hardly at all, and if I do, I use something like the Kemper. And so it makes sense to take these and put them on the desk so I have easy access to them. I mentioned the Kemper. I bought this a few years ago, and although I have software, guitar rig, those type of things, I found this to be a great device that gives me some hands-on, has great sounds. I only use 3 or 4 different amps, but I really like them, and I've somewhat dialed them in. So it's a very important part of my guitar recording process. I've also started adding external synthesizers. I bought this Roland JU06, and then the MS-20, and then the Peak, which you can't see, it's on my desk, which I really like, by Novation. And then we have the D by this company, and I'm still trying to decide if I want them in my life or not. When I added a couple synthesizers in the Kemper, I realized I needed a way to get these sounds into the computer easily, so I bought this Ashley 8-channel stereo mixer. All of the outputs of the synthesizers and the Kemper go into the inputs on the Ashley, and from the Ashley, I go into the computer. As we move forward with this, it's important to remember that there are instrument level signals, and there are line level signals. So everything going into the mixer is instrument level and going out is line level. One of the first ways that I implemented my effects is I took the timeline right here, which is a stereo box that can be used instrument level or line level, and I plugged that into the stereo outputs. I put them at the end of the chain and ran the 1/4-inch outs into the DI input of a pair of preamps. And that worked great for a while. As for the Kemper, not only did I run the stereo outputs into the Ashley mixer, I ran the XLR outputs to a dedicated pair of preamps. That way, when all this was in flux for the longest time and there were cables everywhere, I wanted to make sure that if I needed to play a guitar part, I would have the XLR out to the Kemper going in and it would work for me. For the longest time, I had my pedals stored on these slide-out trays, which work great, and they work great now for what I'm trying to do, but I found that I really wanted to get the pedals up onto my desk so I could access them. A few weeks ago, these boxes were sitting on the desk, so I built this hutch to raise them up, and then I built this sliding tray. And the purpose for this is it's just tall enough that it can cover up the ins and outs of this first row. I can access all the cables underneath it if I need to. I have a Voodoo Labs power supply at the moment underneath there. And I can quickly access this top row of effects. Now, I will eventually demonstrate how a lot of this sounds, but this is not a video about these pedals. These are the pedals that I have at the moment. This is more of a video about signal flow, and I'll try to demonstrate as best I possibly can. But having this raised up and angled slightly means that I can get to these easily. I also put some LEDs that I can control, and we can go a little crazy if we want. Fun fact, these are cheap LEDs. They have to be all the way up in order to not cause flicker on my camera. I added some layers of fabric to kind of cover that up and diffuse the light, because that's important to me. And so I think I'm happy with the results at this point. The first thing I want to do is demonstrate how I record guitar, and you can see my signal path from guitar to the pedals, Kemper, and then out. We'll start with my Tele. So what I've done is I've got this input down here, and it's running to the bottom of my rack, so I can reach down and grab this cable always. I'm first running through my SP compressor. At some point I needed a small compressor for my pedal board, and it works great. That goes into my Zvex, it's the name of a pedal that I can't really say, so look it up, into this tremolo that was given to me by a friend. It's got the Keeley mod, and so I can match the volume. Not a huge issue in studio settings, but it's great for live play. Now after that, I'm going into the Kemper. Right now, I have a deluxe clean sound. That's going out into the Ashley mixer. I engage the Kemper, go in stereo out, and now we're going through these pedals. So let me demonstrate from the top. Compressor. My speakers aren't terribly loud because I don't want there to be bleed into the microphone, so hopefully you're hearing that compressor engaged. Then I have this boost pedal. Tremolo. Now I've got the effects turned off. Have some effects that I can use there in the Kemper if I want. I can engage the amplifier, EQ, and cabinet and the stack, or turn the entire stack on and off, and I have stomp boxes that can engage if I wanted to. Out of the Ashley goes into this stereo path. And it starts with this crazy pedal that I still don't know how to use, the Enzo by Maris. I've got quite a bit of work to do when it comes to this pedal. Recently, I added the Strymon Deco, which is great for the crazy effects here. If you want that warbly modulated effect, it's great, and I'll use that subtly on occasion, sometimes more aggressive. But over on this side, you have some great saturation. And then the timeline. And then so many videos to watch on these two devices. I don't know if these are going to stay here. One, this is borrowed. One thing I do like about the timeline, and the reason why it might stick around, is I have MIDI in and out, and I can lock to tempo. So if I'm doing an arpeggiated run and I want dotted eighths, I can lock right to it. In some ways, that kind of goes against what I'm trying to do here. So I'll probably either add delays or reverbs, things that I can tweak hands-on. I don't care for the software and saving presets. That doesn't interest me in this particular setup. So this will often change. We'll call this my outboard effects guitar routing system in 2020, because I'm sure I'll do a different one in 2021. In addition to the instrument cable that's running out the bottom of the rack, I also have a Moog expression pedal that I'm plugging into the back of the Kemper, and I'm using that mostly as a volume pedal. And that's enough for the guitar. As far as my synthesizers go, for instance, the MS-20, engage that. So this part of the process is what I was stuck on for the longest time. I've got my synthesizers running into inputs on the mixer and out into my stereo effects chain. And that's great when I want to utilize these. But by doing that, I have no way, without unplugging, of taking my outputs of the synthesizers into my mono chain. And so that's where my patch bay comes in. Now, I mentioned earlier, I could put everything in the patch bay, but I'm trying to limit what I'm putting in the patch bay. So what I've done is, instead of going directly into the mixer, I am going into a patch bay. It's important to keep in mind that the top row of the patch bay are the outputs from my synthesizers. and the bottom row are normaled, meaning the signal passes directly through to the input to the corresponding channel of the Ashley mixer. Now, they don't line up 1 to 8 because, for instance, the Kemper didn't need to go through the patch bay because I accessed the mono path before the Kemper. So for my JU06, it's going into the first two left and right. The input of the Ashley mixer is plugged into here in the back, going into the JU06. So let's look at the MS-20. It is normal. The signal path is going through this patch bay and then going out. But what this allows me to do, if I want to run my MS-20 through my mono path, well, I reach down here and I grab my cable for my guitar and I plug that into the output of the MS-20 and I mute the MS-20 because now the signal is going out of the MS-20 through this into the Kemper. Now with the Kemper, I'm running through this amp setting, which I may or may not want to do, so I can turn off the stack, and now I believe I'm running a clean signal through. If not, I may develop some synth-specific profiles to run this through. Now I can run everything through my mono pedals and not in love with that sound there, but you get the idea. This gives me plenty of flexibility that if I want to run through my SP202, run the outputs of that, which is the sampler that I featured a few weeks ago, I can easily run the outputs of that through. I have some extra pedals I can pop in. Is this a perfect system? Absolutely not. I can't, without unplugging pedals, run everything through everything, but it's pretty close. I think it's going to do 95% of what I want to do. What I also wanted to accomplish with this setup was to be able to run signal from Pro Tools out into this rack. So I'll demonstrate how I would access my stereo chain, my line level chain. In my patch bay, what I've done, instead of going directly out of the Ashley into these effects, I'm going into the patch bay. So the outputs of my Ashley are in the stereo section right here at the top, and the inputs are going into this first pedal. Over here on my desk is where I have my patch bay for my compressors and my preamps and all that. And so I've got two outputs on the front. So what I do is I take a TT patch cable and I run that into the input of this line level effects chain and then run that out into preamps. Like I mentioned earlier, I don't ever want to mix line level and instrument signals, but the only way that I could really mess that up is if I went from my TT patch cable, a line level, and plug that directly into here, which I think I'm smart enough to never do that. Now that accomplishes sending signal through my stereo line level chain, but it doesn't help me out with my mono instrument level effects. And so what I've done at this point is I ordered, this arrived in the mail a couple days ago, my DIY RE, DIY recording equipment reamp box. And what that does, if you don't know, is it takes line level signals and allows you to convert them to instrument level signals. So I will put that right here in the patch bay. So I could take my line out from my computer and plug that into the reamp, and now I can go out of the reamp into my mono effects chain. That also allows me, if I have some loud signals coming from a synthesizer, maybe it is line level, I could then patch that from my output of the synthesizer into the reamp and out. So this gives me quite a bit of flexibility. It's not a perfect setup, but it works for me. If you have questions about this and you have some suggestions for me, shoot them my way. I'll link to other videos that can go in depth on more advanced setups. But for me, this does the trick and it keeps the creative flow going. When I sit down to write, I can quickly send signal where I want it to go and write the parts that I want to write and not get bogged down in plugging things in. And more importantly, it gives me the framework to add more pedals, which I most certainly will be doing. If you enjoyed this, I'd appreciate a like and a subscribe, and I'll see you next week.